Hello and welcome back, and thanks again for joining us for the final part of this three-part series. My name is Nadia Bainbridge and I'm the Head of Product at OASIS. And for those of you expecting to see David Reynolds, our Chief Digital Officer, unfortunately he can't be with us today, but I will be guiding you through today's session on breaking down silos and integrating physical and digital records. Over the past few sessions, we've talked about the bigger picture, the need to bring governance out of its silo, and how the right technology, particularly when embedded in platforms like Microsoft 365, can actually simplify rather than complicate how we manage information. But there's a hard truth I want to start with today. Even the smartest strategy and the most elegant technology will fail if people don't adopt it. That's the focus today, not the system itself, but what makes it stick. We'll explore why adoption fails, what successful change can look like in practice, and how you can bring others with you, whether that's IT, legal, frontline teams, or leadership. And while we'll absolutely talk about governance, this is really a session about people, behaviour, and momentum. Because when we talk about adoption, we're not just talking about usage stats or logins, we're talking about whether people change what they do, and whether they do it without needing to be told. That's the benchmark. That's what real success looks like. So let's begin with the problem. In so many organisations, the hard work is done, the system's procured, the policy is agreed, the comms are written. But 6 months later, very little has changed. You still find documents in local folders, shared drives are still full of duplicates. People still ask the same questions. Where do I find X? Which version is the right one? That's the last mile problem. It's the difference between implementation and transformation. Adoption fails for a few key reasons. The tool is seen as extra work, not something that saves time. There's no clear personal benefit, so people revert to old habits. Training is seen as a one-time event, not a habit-building process. Policies exist, but they're abstract. They don't show up in how people actually work. In short, adoption fails when systems are delivered, but behaviours are left behind. The real unlock isn't more systems or stricter policy, it's alignment between what people are asked to do, what they're supported to do, and what they're rewarded for doing. So what does success actually look like? One of the mistakes we often make is assuming that once something is rolled out, it's adopted. But rollout is just the beginning. Real adoption, the kind that lasts, looks more like a ritual than a project. It's not just about whether people log in, it's about whether they've changed how they work. Here's what that looks like in a records environment. People follow the right process without needing to be reminded. Tagging, retention, and access controls are just part of the workflow. People stop saving locally because they trust the system to work. When new joiners start, they're onboarded in that way of working, not the old one. And here's the key point. This doesn't happen just because the system exists. It happens when the value of the system is felt day to day, when it saves time, reduces stress, or helps someone avoid a mistake. When you reach that point where using the system is easier than avoiding it, you've moved from rollout to ritual. That's the goal, and it's entirely achievable, but it takes a deliberate approach and a shift in how we think about change. Let's shift gears now and talk about influence. One of the most common frustrations I hear from information professionals is, I know this would work if only the rest of the business got it. And the truth is, your idea might be completely right, but if you can't connect it to what other people care about, it won't get traction. So when we talk about driving adoption, we're not just talking about users, we're talking about stakeholders. The IT team, the legal function, the business leads, the frontline teams. Each group cares about something slightly different, and you need to speak to those priorities. For example, compliance teams want traceability and control. IT care about security, scalability, and integration. Business users are thinking, will this make my life harder or easier? You're not just pitching a system, you're making the case for value in their language. That's why we always recommend shaping your messaging around real outcomes. For legal, talk about faster subject access requests and redactions. For ops, talk about fewer document delays. For IT, talk about leverage, using Microsoft 365 more effectively without adding overhead. Once you connect to what they care about, they're not just accepting that change, they're helping you sell it. This is closely linked to adoption, but it goes deeper because even when leaders agree with a case for change, that doesn't mean the behaviours follow. Often we talk about benefits in strategic terms, things like reducing risk or increasing compliance, but that language doesn't always land with the people who actually need to use the system. Think about this contrast. You say, we're going to be more compliant. They hear, that sounds like more admin. Or you say, it gives us better access to information. And they wonder, but will it be easier to find the document I need on a Friday afternoon when someone's chasing me? To really land adoption, you need to translate strategic value into personal outcomes. What does it do for me today? Does it make my job faster, clearer, less stressful? Does it mean I stop being the bottleneck in someone else's process? If you can answer those questions, not just in theory, but in the way the system actually works, that's when you start to shift behaviour. Because people don't change because it's important to the business. They change when it's better for them now. So, how do we turn that insight into real, lasting change? It starts with moving beyond policy. Because policies are important, they give structure and accountability, but they're invisible to most people most of the time. What matters is habit. And habits are shaped by the environment, by how easy or hard it is to do something the right way. That's why when we design for adoption, we focus on embedding governance into the actual flow of work. So tagging happens when a document is uploaded, not after the fact. So sharing controls are built in and default to secure. So audit and access logs are automatic. No need to remember anything. One way to test this is to ask, can someone follow the governance process without having to read the policy? If the system itself encourages, or even better nudges, the right behaviours, you're in a completely different place. And that's when things start to scale. Because now compliance isn't a separate task. It's just part of how the organisation works. Let's talk about how change actually spreads inside an organisation. We often assume that if we write a policy, do a training session, send out some comms, job done. But that's not how humans work. In reality, people are much more likely to follow what others are doing than what they're told to do, especially if those others are trusted peers, not authority figures. That's why champions are so critical. A champion isn't someone who parrots the policy. It's someone who shows their team how they actually work in their context. They demonstrate that it's faster, easier, smarter, and they model the behaviour in the way that others can copy. This is how culture starts to shift, because when enough people around you are doing something in a certain way, it stops feeling like change and starts feeling like normal. So rather than just investing in training, invest in champions. And once you've got some early traction, amplify it. Share short wins, talk about what's working. Let others hear, this made my day easier, not just this meets our compliance goal. That's the kind of message that travels and sticks. So this is one for the leaders in the room, or those of you who influence them, because adoption doesn't just happen at the front line. The behaviours of leadership, what they say, but more importantly, what they do, set the tone for everything else. So what does good leadership look like in the context of driving adoption and change? First, don't delegate adoption, model it. If leaders are still working from local folders, no one else is going to switch. Second, make outcomes visible. Recognise the teams who are doing it right not just with praise, but with profile. Third, sponsor feedback loops. Make it normal to say, this isn't working, and fix it fast. That builds trust. Fourth, involve your governance teams in the rollout, not just your IT teams. This is about behaviour and policy, not just systems. And finally, focus on behaviours, not features. What matters is what people do, not just what's technically possible. When leaders model and reward the right behaviours, adoption becomes not just possible, it becomes inevitable. One of the challenges with change is this. If it's going well, it often feels invisible. So let's make it visible. Let's talk about how you know when adoption is actually working, because if we don't track and share these signals, we lose momentum. So what should you be looking for? Fewer emails with attachments because people are linking to live documents instead. More successful searches and fewer people asking, where's that file? Consistent file locations, not duplicates saved just in case. Faster response times to subject access requests or audits because the process is built in, not bolted on. And perhaps most powerfully, when someone says, we use this because it works. That's the point where adoption has gone from policy to practice. So I'd encourage you to define and celebrate your early signals of traction because they're not just proof of progress, they're fuel. And they're a signal to others that this is real, this is working, and this is worth getting behind. Let's wrap the behavioural side with something practical. What actually works when people push back? Resistance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's passive. People don't complain, they just don't change. So how do you get around that? Here are a few tactics we've seen work across organisations. Number one, name the pain. Instead of selling the solution, start by naming the problem everyone already feels. I know finding the right version of this document is a pain. That builds empathy and positions the new approach as relief, not instruction. Number two, show, don't tell. A 2-minute screen recording or walkthrough from someone in the team beats any policy document, especially if it's someone respected, someone they relate to. 3, make the first move easy. People will resist uploading 200 documents, but they'll upload 3 if that helps someone else. Focus on the smallest change that has the biggest impact and use that to create momentum. Number 4, close the loop. If someone gives feedback, show that you've heard it, acted on it, and improved things. That builds trust and encourages further engagement. And lastly, number 5, keep the message going. Most adoption efforts fade because the message dies out after launch. But habits form through repetition, reinforcement, and recognition. So keep the message live, visible, and people-focused, not system-led. There's one final technique I want to leave with you, something I've found incredibly useful when trying to get others aligned and thinking bigger. Ask your stakeholders to imagine this. It's 3 years from now. The change that you're pushing for right now has not only worked, it's being written about. There's a press release going out about how your company transformed the way it manages information. The headline isn't just about the tool. It's about how the organisation became smarter, more secure, and more agile because of the change in approach. And in the first paragraph, it talks about how records became trusted, how teams could finally find what they need, how audits were easier, how legal risk fell, and crucially, how it became the new normal. Now ask, what would you need for that to be true and for that to happen? It's a powerful way to reframe the conversation away from features and resistance and towards ambition and ownership. Because ultimately, what you're building isn't just compliance. You're building capability. You're building culture. You're building confidence. The biggest risk with any good plan is that it stalls after the first burst of activity. So here's a way to prevent that, a simple 30-60-90 framework. In the first 30 days, focus on awareness and environment. Are the basics in place? Is access clear? Do people know where to go and what to do? In the 60-day window, switch focus to your reinforcement. Spot the patterns. Where is it working? Where is it stuck? Promote champions. Recognize small wins. Run a pulse check. One quick question. Is this making your job easier? And by 90 days, you're looking to scale and embed. Our new join is being trained the right way. Can you simplify that workflow further? What's your next adoption push and who's sponsoring it? The key here is that change doesn't need to be complex. It needs to be consistent. So define a rhythm, one that turns interest into habit and habit into value. So let's bring it all together. Adoption is not the last step. It's the difference between a plan and a result. It's where governance becomes real and where systems either succeed or stall. We've talked about the behaviours that drive change. We've talked about the case you need to build and the tactics that beat resistance. But I want to leave you with one final idea, and that's credibility through traction. When others see your team getting results, whether it's faster audits, better user experience, or fewer information headaches, you gain permission to do more. That's the flywheel. And at the centre of it all is trust. Trust in the system, trust in the process, but trust that this is worth the effort. So as you go back into your business, whatever role you play, think about the next small win. Not the whole roadmap, not the whole system, just the first visible, undeniable sign that something is better, because that's how resistance turns into results. Thank you so much for your attention today and through all the webinars we've held. We hope you've enjoyed them. If you have any questions, please reach out directly to either myself, Nadia.Bainbridge@oasisgroup.com or David Reynolds. Thank you.